Welcome back to another episode of Boom or Bust. I'm your host, Terry, and today I'm doing another editorial. But before I start, I wanted to make sure I made a plain and simple statement. And that is this. When I do these episodes, especially editorials, I want to make it clear. I'm not getting on the mic to tell you that you have to agree with what I say. I'm not getting on the mic to tell you who's right or wrong. I'm not getting on the mic to tell you what's fact or fiction. I'm simply just giving you an opinion and a point of view. And that point of view might be similar to yours. It might be alternate to yours. That point of view might make you slightly change your thoughts as you hear something you didn't consider. Or it might make you even more resolute in your thoughts because you didn't agree with what I had to say. Either way, coming to me to tell me that how wrong I am or things of that nature is really just a waste of other people's time. And honestly, I'm 1,000% never going to be affected by those comments. So you really just wasting time. Well, I'm more worried about the comment section where people are being attacked that just came here to listen or express their opinion. And I never want to get to a point to have a comment section that's like that. And so I would just ask that people respect everybody's freedom. We all have that freedom to feel the way we feel, but we can do it in a respectful way without attacking each other's person or character. So I just want to say again, I'm not here to tell you what is law. I'm just here to tell you how it looks from my point of view. And you could, take that or leave it. And simple as that. All right. So with further ado, I'm going to get into today's editorial about mental health in sports. Now, this conversation wasn't created, but it is stemming from a recent interview with Darvish, the Cubs pitcher, who again had an interview recently or at least that came out recently, that a lot of people are talking about, in which he basically discussed his feelings and thoughts when it comes to performing his job on a large stage and interacting with fans and all these different things, and even talking about possibly retiring a couple years excuse me, even possibly talking about retiring a couple years ago. And a lot of people are, well, at least I would say people are reacting on both sides of it, of course. And I only expect even more reaction to come as you had a player who pretty much already was kind of in a negative light, as he was a big acquisition this year for the Cubs, but hasn't shown that he has lived up to the contract so far. And then on top of that, he had a kind of a reputation coming in anyway. And so this sparks this whole discussion about mental health. Now, again, like I said, this isn't created by Darvish, because you had guys like Kevin Love recently in the NBA talk about his issues. But even further back than that, Royce White, who was drafted by the Rockets and never really got to play out of Iowa, and he was a big advocate for the awareness that the mental health issues going on. And so he was someone that's been talking about it for a while. And then, of course, you have people in other sports. So it's not a new phenomenon, but it is a conversation I think that's worth having, because we all know pretty much that old school mentality of how sports is. A lot of people that have played or been around the sports, that most people or most sports, they have the saying that it's 10% physical, 90% mental, or 20% physical, 80% mental, whichever percentage they like to use. And they talk about that mentality that you got to have, not only to succeed at sports, but to compete at a high level, especially in professional sports. And so that's something that has always been ingrained. And we live in a self-proclaimed progressive society where a lot of the historical norms are being challenged, not just in the way we behave, but in the way we think. And so this whole idea of mental health is starting to really take forefront as more and more specialists and doctors and people that study this, they're starting to really push the idea that to be healthy mentally and mentally strong is not to repress or to remove that emotions, but really to express them in a positive light. So you have some people that naturally react to you Darvish comments and say, well, he's mentally weak, or that he can't perform if he's that mentally weak. If he's so worried about other things other than performing his job, or that he's rattled by those things to the point where he doesn't want to interact with fans or what have you, that he's mentally weak, he's a waste of money, blah, 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 and he can't do what we need him to do. And then there's other people that rush to the defense and say, you know what, we got to start changing that thought process. He's actually mentally strong, that he can admit what he's going through, and that he can talk about it and still perform as he's done in the past, maybe not currently in this season, but he has shown that he's a player worth that money. And he's done it despite those hurdles that he's had. Clearly, they didn't just come out of nowhere. And so those are kind of two things people are talking about. And I'm be very clear. I'm not saying one side is right or wrong. We're just really exploring the conversation, because I would say for me, it definitely comes down to performance. Now, to say that he had an interview and he kind of expressed what he was going through and talked about it and all of those different things, I don't see an issue with that. I don't see a problem that just because he stated it and he talked about it, that it's an issue. Now, some people have sat here and will say that, you know, a lot of people go through stuff. So you don't have to say it, though. You don't have to let people know, because then, you know, you're being mentally weak, or, you know, you're not strong. Just kind of keep that to yourself. And that's where I would push back. And I would say that this is kind of the narrative people are talking about, that the tough athlete, the gladiators, the warriors, they're the ones that they don't show any fear. They don't show any pain. They keep it to themselves and keep about their job. And I would say that it could be dangerous, because there are plenty of sports psychologists that have been for a while, and definitely now, talking about the historical mindset of an athlete and how it could be potentially harmful, and how it's really not a healthy mindset to be in. If you haven't heard this before, many people consider the top athletes to be psychopaths, and not as in serial killer and all those different things. The violence is not exactly inherent in the psychopath. It's really about the ability to detach emotion and to rigidly, cold-heartedly go at a task and to work at it until it's done, and to really take away the self-blame that comes with it. And so while it does make effective for an athlete that can sit down and work at their craft and get the muscle memory to a specific details and everything, there is inherent issues or, you know, potential problems with having a mindset like that. And then most of the top athletes, you know, top performers, it's more than just athletics, but we'll stick with athletes. They can be considered narcissists as well, as far as the mental makeup, how they can be so self-involved and, you know, really so worried about their own image, whether it be their physical image or their reputation, especially when we talk about in today's media age and social media age, where they can be so self-involved with themselves that they can be devoid of camaraderie with other teammates, and they can be devoid of just really what I should say, healthy healthy interactions with interpersonal relationships. And you've heard things like that about Kobe, and you heard things about that like Michael Jordan. You heard things about that with some of the great football players, where, again, when you get to competing at that elite level, those are some of the traits that come out. And it's been built over time because you've been taught, and we all imagine that's how an athlete is supposed to be. You're supposed to be a gladiator, for lack of a better word, where you're supposed to go out there and you're supposed to fight and battle no matter what. And we're not necessarily talking about physical injuries and battling through those things. Those come with their own inherent risk, but we're really just talking about this idea of a rigid athlete, and that's the way you're supposed to be. And that's how some people felt about Yu Darvish, and that he doesn't need to express these things. You can feel it, but don't express it. And then again, there's people that push back, and I feel like I'm on that side where it's okay to express it and it's okay to own it. But the problem comes in is when it affects your performance. Now, this is the part that I'll be on the other side, because to say having that those thoughts and to having anxiety and to having these different feelings is inherently makes you a worse player, I don't believe that's true. You've heard stories, and again, it goes outside of athletes. You talk about musicians, entertainers, whatever. You hear many stories about people throwing up before a performance or having to do these type of rituals before every performance. Those are all just symptoms of anxiety, of nerves and everything, things that are natural for a person to have. Even if you have tremendous talent, even if you know you're one of the best, to go out there and do it every night is still an amazing feat in itself. And so if you hear that a top athlete or someone that's supposed to be an elite level is maybe, let's say they cry before every time because they go through this mental process of having to let that emotion out, that doesn't make them a worse player. Like, that's just human nature. And so what happens is that it starts to come to a head when you see an athlete being hindered by those emotions or being hindered by those feelings. I mean, and again, I'm not, this is just my point of view. I'm not trying to slander, but for me, a person like LeBron James has always been somebody that, if you want to say mentally, not mentally strong or mentally tough, if in terms of being bothered by things to the point where it affects his performance, things that he shouldn't be bothered by or other players aren't bothered by. And so if you want to use that definition, LeBron's somebody's that like that. Now, meaning that in the biggest moments, maybe it's just something he's thinking about in his performance, or it's people that I've noticed, it's people that get in his ear, maybe say something personal or whatever that really sets him off. Now, you could be angry again. Somebody talk about your mom, your daughter, or whatever, your wife. Yes, it's natural to be upset. But if it's to the point where it's going to make you act out of character, then that's when that becomes, a different thing. Now, it's a scale. It's not just black and white. Some people, maybe once in a while, it triggers them. Some people, maybe it always triggers them. And then, of course, there's some people that maybe they never get triggered. And so we talk about their mental toughness in those types of terms. But again, it's not inherent in having those feelings. It's more about how you let it affect you. So people, I think, are mixing up two different things. Like, I hear fans and people talking, saying they're worried about Yu Darvish. And mainly because you heard that coming in, that he, wasn't the most clutch because of his mental makeup. And then you hear now that he thought about retiring, all these things he has. And so there is a fine line. And I think the case with Yu Darvish especially, that's one that is going to make it muddy, because clearly he's been affected in his performance. Clearly it's been at a point where he hasn't performed the way people thought. Now, whether that also be due to injury or whatever, but we're talking about before he even played with the Cubs. There's times where people have documented, and the scouting reports are, he can be easily rattled, X, Y, Z. So then we talk about, okay, him admitting to those things, him owning those things, is not the same as him being affected by those things, which I've mentioned before. We have athletes, probably every athlete, that especially in this day and age, where they are worried about what fans say, they're worried about what other players say, they're worried about what the older Hall of Famers say. They might be nervous before a game. It's a contract year, or maybe they're going up against a rival. Whatever. They can be affected in many different ways. So to go through those emotions and to experience it doesn't make you any less of a player. But that is different than actually how you perform and how you let those things affect you. So yes, I think both sides can be right in this sense that they are worried about you, Darvish, because he's a guy that's made up where it's going to affect his performance, and he needs to get to a point where it doesn't. But also the other side is right, where it's not wrong of him to feel that way. It is not wrong of him to go through those things. And another thing people talk about you, Darvish, is the cultural part. And it's a different culture that you come from than over here in the United States. And it's not just his culture, but many different cultures. And sometimes Americans, they just don't have that. They don't have that ability to put themselves in other people's shoes, to know what it is to really have that shame. Because he talks about how he's so afraid to let people down, and he's afraid to let the fans down, or let the team down, all those different things. And that comes from a deeper cultural perspective that he had to grow up with, and something that we definitely in America don't have overall. You might have it for certain things, but overall we don't grow up with that sense of, representing a larger organization. It's all about the individual. Some people are family people. For the most part, we're all about the individual, capitalizing on what we can get. And so you might not be able to relate to exactly where he's coming from, or players of different countries where they're coming from, when things are more important to them or affect them differently than they affect us. So that's something that also has to go into it. And as most things, I continue to just say, it's not black and white, and people have to continue to see the layers of complexities that go into it and stop painting people with a broad brush. But, past you, Darvish, I think, and we definitely see it more and more, but I think as fans, we got to continue to grow as the sports and the society grows, to realize that definition of an athlete that you used to have is not the same anymore, and it shouldn't be the same, and it's not really healthy either. You get that apex mentality, and it definitely helps with the killer instinct as far as how you go out there and attack a task, how you go out there and attack your workouts and get better. But that the whole, tough guy thing, is not what's needed. And I know a lot of fans, they just really automatically pull away from that notion, and they push against that idea. Like, no, that's just not how I believe. That's not what I've seen. That's not what I've been taught. You have to be tough. You got to be all this. Don't show no fear, blah, blah, blah. And we just got to realize it's not exactly that. And it's tough for me. I grew up that same way too. And I coach football, of course, and I've definitely had many, many players and had many conversations with coaches about who's mentally tough, who's mentally weak. You got players that can't take people yelling at them no more, and all these different things. And again, I think we got to move past the fact that, or we got to stop harping on the fact that people experience these things, and start focusing more on how to teach athletes to get past these things, how to persevere. And that's one thing, because we so focused on the appearance, on the facade. It's got to appear like you're not hurt. It's got to appear like you're not phased. It's got to all about the appearance. But you think about all these generations of athletes, and even the guys you think that were the toughest. Do you think all of them actually were like that? Like they never had issues? Of course they did. But they have to show that appearance. And I think we got to get past that, because that's just surface level. We got to get past teaching our athletes how to look tough and how to do all these things, and teach them how to actually persevere, how to accept the way they feel about those things, but how to maneuver past it and continue to go on. And that's what a lot of core of the sports psychology is about, getting those winning mindsets, those growth mindsets, those abilities to overcome. And yes, that stuff is important. I think that's important to you, Darvish, too, because athletes are humans, but they're not the typical humans. Not every human is going to go out there and be able to do what they do. So it's okay to feel something that's natural, but you do have to evaluate how much of it is going to affect your ability to go out there and play. But I think it's far from over, I should say. I think a lot of people in basketball in that league feel empowered to bring up these issues and to talk about it. So I don't think that'll stop. I think football and baseball are slowly behind, but I think it's coming. It's coming to that point where people can just be open about those type of things that they're going through. And a lot of people will respect it, but there's a lot of fans out there that I don't want to hear that. I'm not going to say what they actually would say. We know it's all types of terrible stuff. We know what we call people that feel. But it is a psychological issue. It's a mental health issue that is very epidemic in minority places, places of poverty, all those different things where you grow up being taught to just keep it in, and feelings are bad, things of that nature. We don't need you to feel. You got to be a man up, toughen up. Toughen up means to not care, to not feel, to not fear. And that's just not true. And it's been plaguing generations and generations of people, let alone athletes. And I think we got to get ready to come out on the other side of that. As fans, we got to grow and continue to understand that what toughness really means, what mental health is really valued at on our hierarchy, and really just understand what these athletes are going through. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. Definitely go to the comment section if you got any thoughts. Thumbs up, subscribe, share it around, get the convo started. And yeah, thank you for listening.